He's sending troops to handle, quote, domestic terrorists.
Leaders in Portland, Oregon are pushing back against attempt to clean up crime.
He authorized the use of full force if necessary.
Portland just endured one of the most volatile nights of civil unrest in recent memory. What began as a massive crowd gathering outside the city's federal facility quickly spiraled into a violent confrontation between Antifa militants, sanctuary zone mobs, and federal forces. Officials reported that the crowd had been warned several times to remain behind the security barricades. But as the night deepened, the chants grew louder, the tension thicker. Fireworks erupted overhead while bottles, paintballs, and debris pelted officers stationed at the perimeter. The moment protesters crossed the blue security line marking federal property, everything changed. Commanders on site immediately authorized a full tactical response. A Marine-backed strike unit mobilized in coordination with ICE and DHS tactical teams, advancing through the haze of smoke with shields raised and gas masks sealed tight. Within moments, the intersection erupted in chaos. Flashbang grenades detonated one after another, lighting up the night sky as agents pushed the mob backward under a deafening roar of explosions that echoed across several city blocks. Federal officials later confirmed that the response was not spontaneous. It had been meticulously planned after several consecutive nights of escalating violence outside the compound. Federal officers had already faced multiple assaults with fireworks, glass bottles, and high-powered industrial lasers designed to blind surveillance cameras and pilots. This time, the order from command was explicit: move in, clear the streets, and re-establish control over federal ground. As tactical units advanced, 3 rioters were taken down immediately, tackled, zip-tied, and dragged to holding areas, while others scattered through nearby alleys. Video footage captured scenes that resembled an urban battlefield more than a protest. Officers moved in tight formation through clouds of tear gas, while small fires burned beside overturned barricades and debris. Officials stated that several agitators were armed with improvised explosives and makeshift weapons fashioned from construction tools. Antifa-linked accounts live-streamed the chaos online, framing it as resistance. Federal commanders, however, described it in starkly different terms: domestic anarchy. One counter-protester wearing a red MAGA hat was filmed being beaten by masked agitators before ICE agents intervened, pulling him to safety amid the smoke and confusion. By midnight, the streets surrounding the ICE building were littered with shattered glass, broken shields, and smoldering trash bins. Teams of federal officers methodically cleared each block, detaining suspects and restoring perimeters. Officials reported multiple officer injuries and significant property damage, but confirmed that the facility itself remained secure. For many who watched the scene unfold, the sight of Marines, DHS agents, and riot police advancing through downtown Portland looked like a war zone. Yet federal leaders insisted the operation was not a political show of force. It was a necessary act of defense for a facility under siege. By dawn, the streets were quiet again, but the cost was heavy. Dozens of arrests, widespread damage, and a city divided over what had just occurred. Authorities confirmed that more than 70 individuals were detained during the operation, facing charges ranging from assaulting law enforcement officers to vandalizing federal property and resisting arrest. ICE officials added that several agitators had traveled into Portland from surrounding sanctuary zones, coordinating the assault through encrypted group chats. Among those arrested were known Antifa organizers, undocumented foreign nationals, and local activists accused of supplying tactical support to the crowd. According to officers on the ground, the rioters were anything but disorganized. They moved in teams, used military-style shields and goggles, and displayed an alarming level of tactical coordination. Federal commanders stressed that this was not spontaneous outrage. It was planned resistance. Their standing order to all federal personnel was unambiguous. Anyone crossing into federal territory would be detained, no exceptions. But as the smoke began to lift, even more disturbing allegations started to surface. Leaked footage from inside federal channels appeared to show Portland police officers engaging with Antifa organizers before the violence broke out. In the video, officers could be seen pointing to areas of the sidewalk and explaining which zones were under city jurisdiction, effectively telling the crowd how to avoid federal arrest zones. Now, federal attorneys are demanding full access to communications between local law enforcement and known Antifa figures. DHS insiders say that, if verified, this evidence could reveal potential coordination between city officials and groups responsible for repeated attacks on federal officers. The mere suggestion of collusion set off an immediate political firestorm. Lawmakers began calling for congressional review, and federal investigators started probing whether local officials intentionally undermined federal enforcement efforts. The night's turmoil didn't end with the mass arrests either. Hours later, Portland police, not federal agents, detained an independent journalist who had been documenting the riots. His footage showed Antifa rioters hurling fireworks, bottles, and projectiles at officers, as well as scenes of him being attacked by masked agitators before being taken into custody himself. For Portland, the night was a grim reminder of how fragile order can become when politics and violence collide. And for federal authorities, it was another chapter in the escalating struggle to maintain control in a city where chaos seems to return the moment the smoke clears. "I was punished for filming the truth," the journalist said in a statement following his release. His arrest ignited outrage across media circles, with many accusing Portland officials of shielding radicals while targeting those trying to document the violence. Federal sources privately called it a disturbing pattern, that local authorities seemed more focused on controlling optics than stopping criminal activity. By sunrise, the courthouse steps were littered with handcuffs, rubber bullets, and scorched barricades. DHS confirmed that more than a dozen suspects had been transferred to federal custody for prosecution, while ICE transported several undocumented detainees to processing centers for deportation hearings. At the same time, legal advocacy groups demanded full disclosure of communication logs between Portland police and protest organizers. Civil rights attorneys filed motions seeking to uncover whether city leadership had quietly ordered officers to stand down as federal units advanced. Officials in Washington vowed to keep digging, promising that every link between local agencies and violent extremist networks would be exposed. For now, the streets of Portland were calm again, but federal investigators described the calm as fragile, merely a pause before the next confrontation. The political fallout from the Portland chaos was immediate and fierce. Within hours of the Marine-backed operation, a bitter war of words erupted between city leaders and federal officials. Federal attorneys accused Portland's leadership of turning the city into a sanctuary for lawlessness, arguing that its refusal to cooperate with immigration enforcement had allowed radical groups and undocumented agitators to operate freely under political protection. Civil rights lawyers countered swiftly, announcing lawsuits against DHS and claiming the deployment of federal forces violated local jurisdiction. What followed was a storm of press conferences, televised statements, and finger-pointing, each side blaming the other for turning Portland's streets into a battlefield. For Washington, the case was simple. Portland had failed to maintain order, and the federal government had been forced to intervene. But as the investigations deepened, DHS analysts began piecing together what they called the ideological backbone of the violence. According to internal intelligence briefings, the Portland unrest was not spontaneous outrage. It was orchestrated, led by individuals within a larger Antifa network built around a radical belief system. No borders, no capitalism, no police, and no nation. Officials stated that the goal was never to protest one policy or event, but to dismantle the American system itself, piece by piece. Antifa's methods, investigators said, blended propaganda, organized disruption, and online manipulation to create the illusion of grassroots protest while coordinating targeted attacks behind the scenes. The Portland riot, they concluded, was not random chaos. It was ideology in motion. Investigators traced encrypted communications linking Antifa cells across multiple states, some with suspected connections to foreign activist organizations specializing in street-level agitation and psychological disruption. They thrive on disorder, one official said. The louder the chaos, the easier it is for them to move unseen. As these findings came to light, political pressure on Portland's leadership intensified. Lawmakers in Washington began discussing potential federal oversight of the city's law enforcement agencies. Investigators explored whether local officials had deliberately ordered police to pull back under pressure from activist voter blocs, effectively allowing Antifa and allied groups to expand their influence unchecked. The journalist's footage became a focal point of national debate, and for many, undeniable proof. Some argued that Portland was punishing truth-tellers instead of criminals, turning cameras into targets. For local residents, it marked a breaking point. Businesses had been destroyed, entire blocks filled with smoke, and faith in city leadership seemed to vanish overnight. Federal prosecutors labeled the events of that week a state-sponsored breakdown of order, arguing that the federal government could no longer wait for the city to restore control on its own. By the end of the week, Washington had made its position unmistakably clear. The Marine strike had brought back temporary calm, but it was only the beginning. Federal commanders warned that Antifa cells and illegal agitators were already regrouping, planning new disruptions under the legal shield of sanctuary policies. Portland, they said, had become the test case for what happens when ideology overtakes enforcement, when politics replaces order. Officials emphasized that this was not a matter of partisanship, but of sovereignty and security. If cities will not protect their streets, one federal source warned, Washington will. The message was unmistakable. The next time chaos erupts, the response will come faster, stronger, and broader. For Portland, the battle may have ended that night, but the war over who controls America's streets has only just begun.